Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Geraldine Carney, Vice Chair of the RDS Committee of Enterprise. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's RDS Vision 2030 discussion on the future of the Irish food industry. The agri-food sector, as Ireland's most important indigenous industry, plays a vital role in Ireland's economy. This sector employs over 164,000 people, 7% of total employment, and is worth over 14 billion euros to the national economy. That's 9.5% of total Irish exports. While agriculture accounts also for approximately a third of Irish greenhouse gas emissions, let's not forget that as custodians of the land, farmers provide ecosystem services that can and do contribute positively to addressing environmental challenges. Farmers and the food industry representatives here today are dynamic and innovative. They are adapters and adopters, having embraced many new technologies. The sustainable development of the Irish economy needs a strong food industry. And as part of today's discussion, we would also like to address the long-term sustainability of the sector itself and its role in meeting the climate change challenge over the next decade. We are delighted to welcome Damien O'Reilly to host today's discussion. Having worked in RTE Radio for 23 years, Damien is one of Ireland's most experienced broadcast journalists, presenting a range of mainstream programmes on RTE1. He presents the award-winning countrywide programme each Saturday morning, which has a listenership of over 265,000. The programme focuses on farming, food, environment and rural affairs issues. Damien is a joint founder and current Vice President of the European Network of Agricultural Journalists. Damien is joined today by an expert panel who will share their insights. This includes Tara McCarthy, Chief Executive of Board Bia, the Irish Food Board. Tara has over 20 years' experience in the wider food industry and has operated in overseas markets such as Germany, France and Belgium. She has delivered a number of significant initiatives for the Irish food industry, including under the Pathways for Growth programme, working in entrepreneurship and talent development. Donal Dennehy is Operations Director for Danone and has over 30 years' experience in senior leadership within the food and beverages sector. He is currently Director of the Danone Global Centre for Excellence for Spray Drying Technology. He also chairs Project Clover, a unique collaboration by the Irish food industry to address the feasibility of indigenous renewable gas, biomethane, produced on Irish farms. Enda Buckley is Director of Sustainability with Carbery Group. He has over 16 years' experience in sustainability. For the past 6 years, Enda has worked with Carbery on a series of initiatives and projects such as Farm Zero C, the Carbery Trees Project and the Biorefinery Glass Project. So, with the introductions out of the way, I will now hand you over to our host for the afternoon, Damien O'Reilly. Damien.
Geraldine, thank you very much indeed for that introduction and welcome along everybody. So, as Geraldine says, with binding emissions reduction targets upon us, can the viability of farmers and food producers be protected to continue producing food in a sustainable manner to meet growing global demands over the next decades? Well, they are the issues that we are going to discuss and tease out with the aforementioned panel. You're all very welcome. Great to see you all. Tara, I'm going to begin with you first, and we're going to suppose in this section just look at the state of play, where we are now in relation to where we have to get to. Now, Board Bia is involved through the various quality assurance schemes in auditing farms. When you look at the data that's been gathered from those farms and taking into consideration the various recent EPA reports on water quality, are we match fit? Are Irish farmers, are they ready to meet the targets that are going to be set for them under the various climate initiatives over the next decade?
Well, Damien, there's no doubt that there are challenging times ahead. You can see that the direction of policy, be that a policy coming from Europe or a policy coming from our own government, is going to create a step change and going to create huge challenges, but also huge opportunities for Irish agriculture. And I guess what we're looking for is to understand the supports that farmers are going to need as they navigate those changes, and to ensure that the assets that they have are, I guess, value capture opportunities as well. And that means we all have to keep adapting. We all have to keep changing. We know that policy is going to stay evolving, and we have to be ready for that as well. So if I look to what's Bord Bia doing and how are we, I guess, navigating these changes ahead, I suppose step number one is we're partnering. We're partnering significantly with Teagasc and their signpost farms. That, we believe, is a fundamental, almost living lab opportunity for Ireland to learn and to listen to what's happening. But we're also evolving our own methodologies within Origin Green itself, looking at how we're calculating everything from carbon footprints, etc., so that we're ensuring that the numbers we're collecting are accurate and that we're giving the best feedback to farmers as well. We're also looking at challenging in our own charters and helping companies to navigate this. We're moving to emissions and helping companies navigate that the networks to path zero. We're also looking at market insight, because fundamentally we have to do this not just for policy, but to make it market relevant. So a huge part of this is for us to feed back what is the market going to ask, and almost, as you were describing there, help us to ensure we're match fit for the end of the season as much as for what we're about to go through here. But if I do look at the numbers, as you were asking me, we have, and we look at our carbon footprints per unit of production, and all of the data sets that I'm looking for, it's not total, it's per unit of output is, I guess, the most accurate way that Bord Bia can do that, because we're not part of, every single farm is not part of our schemes. But if I look at the per unit of output on our beef production, it's down 6.5%. It's been down every single year since 2013. And our dairy production, similarly, down 6% as well. So our farmers are increasingly using technology. They're increasingly focused on the numbers behind this, and we're supporting them in that initiative with 21,000 farm feedback reports coming into those farmers to help them navigate the challenges ahead. So I guess in short, I would say a lot done, an awful lot more to do, and there's a lot of unknowns ahead of us within that. But from what we're hearing from farmers, they're up for this challenge, but without a doubt they need support from us. So when we're talking to them, they're saying, I think 79% of farmers say we need more support, we need more data. But having said that, 82% are already using sustainability as a criteria for making decisions. And you're seeing that with soil testing, you're seeing that in the adoption rates of less technology, etc. So I would say that we're getting there, but more to be done.
What do you make of accusations that the broad agri-food sector, particularly the agri-food sector outside the farm gate, that there's a lot of greenwashing going on there? And indeed your own Origin Green programme, people say it doesn't go far enough or hasn't gone far enough. Do you have to up your game there in that regard now, outside the farm gate? Does the agri-food sector, a lot of your members, do they have to do more now to meet the targets? And to I suppose, debunk, I suppose, the criticism that it's not doing enough?
I'd answer that in two parts. The first one, I'd address the greenwashing challenge. And obviously Origin Green nor the food industry is not the competent authority that's looking at the inventory for carbon footprints in Ireland. That is not what this is about. But what this is about is the only country in the world that has created a national, voluntary, holistic farm-to-fork programme that covers everything from packaging to waste to social commitments to sourcing, etc. And I guess when I think of the 300 companies that sign up to the almost 3,000 commitments that they have made, that get that data independently audited, I challenge anyone to tell me there's greenwashing involved in that. Now, that point made, do we have to keep doing more? Absolutely. We're consistently listening to the market, and in any element of what the food industry does or in any walk of life, what you were great at yesterday is not going to get you to tomorrow. So we would say that the demands on sustainability are accelerating. The expectation from both consumers and customers are becoming increasingly demanding. Where you're seen as being a leader yesterday or even today will not serve you well enough for doing it tomorrow. So do we have to up our game? Yes. Will we continuously have to up our game? Yes. But does every single company around the world continue have to update its game? Yes.
Okay, Donal Dennehy, just picking up on that, I mean, Danone is committed to net zero carbons by 2050, I think it is. You've already achieved that certification in your Wexford plant, but you say that you're responsible for the emissions of your farmers that actually supply you. So how do you assess the possibility of reaching that net carbon zero by 2050 based on what you're seeing on the farms at the moment?
Yes, Damien, this is quite a challenge. As we know, Scope 1 and 2 are less of a challenge, and Project Clover comes into that. But Project Clover stretches to Scope 3 as well, where we look at soil sequestration of carbon, which carbon farming will be a big way of the future. And that's the way Danone views this. We have to feed the people of the world, that's a fact. And we need to feed them in a sustainable way. And we have to find the pathways and the mechanisms that are not there now, but will be there in the future. And we have to look at how we do our business in a different way. Danone believes very strongly in our One Planet, One Health scheme. And if we don't have a healthy planet, we won't have healthy food. And that's why we take this very serious and we approach it from very different angles. And we have to go right back to our supply chain and make sure that we're producing food in a sustainable way right into the future, so that we sustain our people, we sustain our planet, and that we as an industry can continue to grow and produce food for our people.
We'll come back to Project Clover in a while, because it's a very exciting prospect that you're heading up there yourself, Donal. But as a global company, processing company, what is the international view of Irish farming and Irish dairy production? How are we seen globally in what we do here?
I think we're seeing that Ireland is a good place to do business. It's a healthy place to do business. It's a green place to do business. And we have a huge footprint here. We produce, in terms of our specialised nutrition, we produce 60% of our global product here in Ireland. And that's not by chance. It's because we do it well. We have a grass-fed system. When we look at the kgs of CO2 per kg of milk solids, it's one of the lowest in the world. And that leads us to choose Ireland as our primary place of production for milk solids. It's not our only place. The world is a big place. But we focus on Ireland for very, very good reasons. It's competitiveness, its sustainability, and its healthiness. So it's seen as green, and it's seen as a can-do country to do business.
So is it seen as a premium product coming from Ireland when compared
to other
countries?
It's seen as a premium product. But we supply many different markets, and when we supply into the likes of China, China says, "Where's Ireland?" It's someplace in the other side of the world. But that's what we have to do. We have to make Ireland more globally known to our customers, because the customers that know us look at us as green, as a sustainable way of producing food, and a good place to do business. But first of all, they have to know us, and that's what we have to do as a country: get out there and be known. Danone knows us.
Tara's doing her best in that regard, Donal. Enda Buckley, similar question to you that I put to Tara in relation to gathering data from farms and analysing what's going on there, because in Carbery you work closely with farmers in achieving efficiency through your Greener Dairy Farm programme in association with Teagasc. So again, do the results tell us in terms of the ability of Irish dairy farms to meet emission reduction targets? What are they telling us?
Yeah, so I suppose if we look specifically, Damien, at the Greener Dairy programme, that programme has delivered on average a 15% reduction in carbon footprint across those farms, and there's approximately 60 farms now in that programme. If we pick one of the farms in that programme, Shannock, where our Farm Zero Seed project is happening, that farm is actually decarbonised by 25% in the last 2 years. And I think another example to cite perhaps is the farm in Solohead up in Tipperary, which Teagasc are involved with as well. Like, they've got a carbon footprint of 0.7 kg CO2 of fat and protein corrected milk. And to put that in context, like the average dairy carbon footprint is about 1.13 kg of CO2. So that's 40% down on the national average. So I think there certainly are examples that I've just cited that show, this can be done, and that farms can radically decarbonise.
Okay, so just on that, this is the big question. This is the big question at the moment in terms of the expansion of the dairy herd, as we know, and there is a conundrum there because with expansion has come obviously the EPA reports in relation to water quality, and as a result the talk is about reducing cow numbers. What farmers want to know though, and what everybody wants to know is, can you maintain the output? In other words, not harm the farmer livelihood, the farm business, by maintaining numbers but at the same time reducing emissions per cow. Is that reasonable? Is it feasible? And is it possible by 2030 based on what you're doing there with the Farm Zero C?
Yeah, so I might just actually explain a bit about Farm Zero C, Damien, if that's okay. So this is happening on a farm called Shannock. Shannock was acquired by the West Cork Co-ops back in 2011. It was originally a beef enterprise. It was converted to a dairy enterprise back in 2012, with the idea being a low input model was the thinking, I suppose, and they wanted, I suppose, to make it attractive for new entrants to dairying as well. So the emphasis up to now has been very much on low inputs. And I suppose a couple of years ago, we came up with a vision that we wanted to actually convert Shannock into a carbon neutral dairy farm. So we've brought some partners with us in that regard. So Biorbic and Professor Kevin O'Connor, UCD, MTU, Trinity College, Grassa, and Teagasc, of course, are a big part of it, as well as a plethora of technology partners. And we put together a submission for the Science Foundation Ireland Zero Emissions Challenge. We went through the various phases, acquired seed phase funding, and I suppose earlier in the summer, Damien, we actually won the Zero Emissions Challenge, which carried with it a 2 million prize fund, which was a fantastic boost for the project. But the ultimate ambition with Farm Zero C is to actually we've actually gone from a carbon neutral ambition to a climate neutral ambition by 2027. And the farm has 250 cows on a 250 acre platform. So it's heavily stocked, and I suppose we'd argue, if we can do this here on Shannock, then we can apply this anywhere. And I suppose, again, through the Greener Dairy programme, through the Signpost programme, which Shannock is also part of, through our own discussion groups that we have at Teagasc, we're hoping that the learnings from the farm will actually then dissipate out to the wider farming public. And, you know, every day that passes, Damien, we're actually more and more encouraged we'll actually achieve the objectives. And I suppose I should also argue it's a very holistic vision. It's not, I suppose initially the focus was very much on carbon, but it's now broadened, and we have, I suppose, kind of 6 distinct work pillars. We have biodiversity and a big emphasis on that, and Professor Jane Stout in Trinity College is actually leading that work profile. We have renewable energy. We have a whole pillar dedicated to business, the business case. We have soil. Donal touched on soil sequestration. That's a big part of it. Animal emissions, and I suppose water as well is a big part of it. So it's holistic, and we'd like to think that it will be a beacon, I suppose, for the industry. And certainly, when you talk to farmers, they're very encouraged when they see what's happening there. And we believe it's doable, Damien.
Yeah. And from the sounds of it as well, there's a lot of collaboration across the spectrum of stakeholders who are invested in obviously reducing emissions while at the same time maintaining the viability of farm and rural communities' livelihoods. So that's where we stand at the moment. That's what's going on. And now if I look at into the future, the immediate, the short to medium term future, as we head towards these various targets of 2030 and 2050, there are hurdles and landmines along the way. As Geraldine pointed out, 1/3 of emissions come from agriculture. They remain stubbornly high, but how can we meet the government target of 51% overall reduction by 2030? You guys, I know, say it is absolutely doable from an agricultural perspective. And Donal, I might just focus in on what you mentioned earlier, and that is Project Clover. Sounds very James Bondish, but tell me a little bit more about that. What is it all about, and how it actually can be a win-win for everybody?
Okay. Basically, Project Clover is an industrial-led initiative, and initially it's dairy industry, but it means to include all industry. And basically where it comes from is we want to decarbonise. As I explained earlier, we want to decarbonise full scope. And how do we do that? In our factories, and our factories are quite big factories for processing milk, we can use green electricity. But we have huge thermal needs, and there is no solution to displacing our thermal consumptions without displacing natural gas. So we looked at what methods were out there, biomass, hydrogen, etc. And the only feasible solution was AD, methane, to displace natural gas. It means that we can produce gas, inject it into the network, and we don't have to re-engineer our factories. But this is a big, big undertaking. So it requires construction and re-engineering of the whole of what we do. So Project Clover is basically we want to have 11% of biomethane in the network by 2030, which is quite an ask. And we, as the consumers, the industry, draw that down. And thus we can benefit, to decarbonise our factories to start with. But then it goes right back into the supply chain. And taking some of the best practices in the soil sequestration and putting them all to work on the farm, we can then start to decarbonise our supply chain as well. So it is a win-win solution.
But you need government buy-in on this, don't you?
Sorry?
You need government buy-in on this.
We need huge government buy-in. We really do. And it's great to see in the latest Climate Action Plan that there is an initiative there for a pilot programme. But we do need long-term government support. That's what we need. And above all, we need Section 23, the Renewable Heat Fuels Scheme, to be implemented, and implemented sooner rather than later, because the time is ticking here and we have to get moving. So we need that implemented in 2023 at the very latest, so that we can start the construction and implementation of these and bring them on stream as soon as possible.
And who are the key stakeholders involved in Project Clover?
Most of the dairy co-ops in Ireland.
So you're working together?
We're all working together. This is really unique. It is, when we speak to people in government, they recognise this is a unique solution. It hasn't happened before where everybody speaks with the one voice to the one goal. We haven't seen that in Irish industry, to the best of my knowledge, in a long, long time. We all recognise that this goal is critical to all of us, and to achieve it we have to act as one. And we now need the government to come on board and support that goal with us and get it off the ground.
Okay, Tara, when we talk about the challenges and the hurdles that lie ahead to meet, obviously, the binding targets I talked about earlier on, you look at communications, research data, feedback and a knowledge gap. Are they major stumbling blocks to actually bringing everybody along together on this journey?
There is definitely a knowledge gap. As I mentioned earlier, farmers have called that out to us, that whilst they want to make the right decision, they're not sure very often all of the actions that are required of them. And I guess there's a responsibility on all of us then too, as working with industry, working with Tagus, our own systems as well, to ensure that we can support farmers navigate this as well. And I guess what we've been doing is really upping the engagement levels with our farmers. So we've created newsletters, we've invested further in our help desks, we've looked at media partnerships, we've text messaging to all of our farmers as well. And it's with two real objectives. Number one, it's to direct them towards the toolkits and the supports that are available to them, but also to connect that to market feedback, so that we want the two of them to remain linked in a farmer's perspective, because they need to see the why the market is asking them for this as well. So we're linking both of those together. Very similarly, companies need support, because this is a completely new vocabulary, and pathways to net zero I think was probably started to be used maybe in the last 3-4 years, and yet there's serious investment as a consequence for that. And again, what we're looking to do is create guidance documents, provide support to companies, create resources for them, be that on their biodiversity and the decisions that they need to make on that, and also then support them with one-to-one mentoring as well. So I do think there's a huge push from the policy side, from the industry stakeholder side, to try and address that communications challenge.
Yeah, and you mentioned a lot of different initiatives there and the different stakeholders. And, you know, when I speak to farmers, they say there's so much mixed messaging going on. On the one hand, they've been told to do something, and then they discover that that puts them on a collision course with another policy from another agency. Is there a lack of joined up thinking when it comes to bringing, you know, from farm to fork, Irish food production along the right path to sustainability?
I guess there are a lot of moving parts, Damien, without a doubt. But I would say that the approach that's been taken, if you look at the dairy industry working as one like never before, if you look at the Tagisk partnership, if you look at their Signpost Farms, 40 partners plus engaged in that. So I do think that perhaps in the past there may have been that accusation, but I would say that if you look today at the attempts of the infrastructure to join the dots, to actually speak with one voice to farmers, if I look at our role with Signpost, the Signpost Farms, the feedback reports and the carbon footprinting that we're doing is being used as the anchor for Tagisk now in Signpost Farms. So we're trying to leverage every single piece of data that we have to allow a farmer to navigate this. So I would say we're all getting better. I guess much done, much more to do is the expression that's often used in these spaces, but we can never take it for granted that we can't do more. And I think that has to be said.
Yeah, and did you find that there is a sort of lack of motivation among some farmers out there, that they're a little bit demoralised in the current climate as well, and that in such a scenario it's difficult to actually bring them along?
You certainly, Damien, we hear that a lot. I think, especially over the last year, I think there's been, you know, I would kind of maybe call it some demonisation of the farm sector. And I think it's like any team, Damien, you know, once they're deflated and they're, you know, getting a bit of a kicking, you know, they're bound to feel demoralised. As to how we get around that, I firmly believe, and Tara touched on this earlier, I think we need to acknowledge that a lot actually has happened, especially over the last decade. You know, you look at the use of EBI, Economic Breeding Index, and how that's brought up the genetic profile of the national herd. The use of less, which is low emission spreading slurry, protected urea, the enhancement of soil fertility. A lot is happening. There's an awful lot happening actually out there, which I think doesn't get acknowledged. So I think as a start, let's acknowledge that, and to use Tara's phrase, a lot done with a lot more to do. And I think in terms of that more to do, you know, I think that and there is great stuff happening, but I think we need to be more cohesive than ever as an industry and actually develop a roadmap, you know, along the lines of the Signpost programme and actually show farmers, look, there's a bright future here. You're producing a fantastic product, the best in the world. And, you know, I suppose farmers are proud of their product, but like I said, they've got a bit of a kicking, and I think we owe it to them as well to show lads, look, there is a really bright future here. We are doing this the best in the world, bar none, and you know, let's be positive about it. I suppose, Damien, would be my perspective on it.
Okay, I want to move on to the other end of the food chain spectrum, from the farmer to the consumer. And what consumers want is more or less determining the future policy of food production. And we know that, like, consumers, they're more invested now in obviously the climate emergency, the causations and the solutions, which means they vote with their feet when it comes to energy use, transport use, and indeed their food choices. And I know that obviously you as processors and marketers take very seriously what you're hearing from in the marketplace. So, Enda, I'll stay with you. You say that it's as plain, you were saying to me earlier, it's as plain as day that sustainability credentials are now a critical part of business, and to survive and thrive, you will have to demonstrate these credentials and be proud of them. Is this a demand that is clearly coming now from consumers and from the marketplace? 100%
yes, Damien. Yeah. I mean, there isn't a week that elapses that we don't get some request from some customer to demonstrate your credentials. And I have to give a shout out to Board and Origin Green, because that is a fantastic, that right now actually I would say is a prerequisite for business where we stand, because you're invariably asked for that certificate, right? But it goes a lot further than that as well, Damien. Like you could be asked, for example, what are you doing on welfare? And you'll get a specific questionnaire, fill out all these questions on welfare. There might be another one on water. There's all these different kind of scoring systems out there as well. So it's you know, you might have got those maybe a couple of years, maybe 5-6 years ago. Now, like I said, it's weekly. So now more than ever, we have to demonstrate our credentials. And like I said, that's, I think, where Origin Green has really served the industry very, very well.
Yeah, Tara, just on that, consumer is king, as they say, and I know that Bord Bia do an awful lot of international marketing and evaluation in the various markets that you actually exist in. Again, you know, do you see this? What feedback are international customers giving you when it comes to sustainable, environmental, efficient food production? What are they saying now?
We actually just in the beginning of September shared a global food sustainability outlook report that we had done, and to get there we went to 13 different markets around the world where Ireland wants to sell products, our priority markets. We reviewed 60 different key publications looking at all of the policy directions that were going to be coming. We spoke with the NGOs, we spoke with trade buyers, and then we spoke with 11,000 consumers spread across those 13 markets. And what you're really hearing is that the speed of those demands that Enda referred to are accelerating. 1 in 2 will view it as a prerequisite that you have sustainability certification behind you. It's a prerequisite to them picking up the phone to you at all. And what the consumer is asking for is probably more tangible, in that they're more worried about the things they understand. And from that perspective, it's how can you help me on food waste? How can you help me on food packaging to ensure that it's sustainable food packaging? They're still trying to understand emissions, yet trade buyers and they understand emissions. So they're, as businesses, setting their own science-based targets. They're looking for scope 3 within those science-based targets, which brings back then those questionnaires that Enda will be receiving and the demands on our farmers, because they are the footprint that is being looked at. So without a doubt, it's becoming more complex. If we look at, and one of the pieces of this work that we looked at as well was, that's now. So it's all about food waste, it's all about packaging for consumers, and to a degree, trade buyers will be very close to those consumers in an immediacy. What's next? What are they then going to start asking? Emissions is coming down, but what you're seeing as well is a clustering of issues. So it's emissions on its own today, but it's emissions plus water plus biodiversity in one cluster. Help me navigate that. And what you're finding is the real opportunity. And again, as was mentioned earlier, what you're seeing here is an opportunity to partner with best customers, to actually become a very sticky supplier. Because if you're the strategic choice, the strategically chosen supplier, because you have the data sets that will help me meet the targets, then it will be much harder to leave you. So you're moving away from being a price conversation to actually a strategic partnership conversation. You can't live without each other, because I need your data sets, because you're going to help me with my carbon footprint reporting, with my net zero reporting. So all of this could be viewed in some ways, Damien, I know we've talked about the challenge, but if you think about it, about the strategic opportunity, that if Ireland is the leader in providing solutions to fantastic, naturally produced but data-supported food, then you would say there's a fantastic opportunity here.
And international customers, do they recognise USPs that we have in Ireland that has us ahead of the pack? What are they?
So we've actually, again, a slightly different piece of work that we've looked at in what will consumers and customers pay more for, and how many of them are connected to what Ireland has. And that's been the ingredients when we're designing what is Irish food. And referring back to Donal's challenge of how do we get China to know about Ireland, well, we researched to understand how would we do that and how would we do that most efficiently. And if I can strip it all back to what are consumers looking for when they think of the best, most efficient food that they're prepared to put in their body but pay a premium for, the ingredients that they will search for at the very base are clean air, clean soil and clean seas. And if you think of the brand that is Ireland, and you look at the soil testing, you look at the sustainability credentials, you look at our food safety criteria, you build every single part of that. You look at our family farms, you look at the naturalness of it, then a shortcut to bring that to life in our beef and dairy world would be grass-based. So when I'm thinking, and as a consumer of grass-based food, I will see animals as nature intended, animals that are extensively reared, animals that are outdoors, which straight away knocks out intensive factory reared, etc. So when we're bringing to life for a consumer what would you pay a premium for in your beef and your dairy? It's those natural attributes, but because we've partnered with Tagus, because we've partnered with our 17,000 dairy farmers, our 55,000 beef farmers, we have the data sets with science backing it up to be the only independently accredited, science-based, grass-based system in the world.
Donal, you mentioned earlier on Danone's One Plant, One Health frame of action, which obviously talks about making a connection between human health and the planet's health and then being interlinked. What happens to all of that and to that if, for example, you cannot reach 100% renewable energy use in your Irish plants in your Irish operation by 2030?
Basically, we're all tasked as industrialists to become carbon neutral, and if we don't succeed in that, foreign direct investment will cease in those plants that are not already there or very close to being there. So it's going to be an impediment to development and investment in Ireland. And I don't think we're going to be alone in this. I think all industry is moving in this way. So if we want to have foreign direct investment continue into the future, we have to find a solution. And we have to find a way towards carbon neutrality. And at the moment on thermal energy, it's very, very difficult for my particular industry to do that without having a biomethane industry to support this. So that's a driving force, as well as other things that drive us. So it's connecting everything together.
And I suppose the energy crisis that we're hearing about across Europe at the moment and relations with Russia and so on, it's a real wake-up call for the industry and for the country in general, isn't it, to obviously look at renewables in a very serious way now?
Wouldn't it be nice to have an indigenous industry that we can say, look, we're independent or semi-independent and we're not left standing if somebody turns off the gas line to us, which we are at the moment. And we can see how, politics can play in this, and somebody decides in the other part of the world to do something, and we're left standing here. If we have an indigenous industry, we can be independent in this way. And also, it's green, it's connected. It is a win-win scenario, but we need to progress it.
Yeah, and I'd be interested in your, I suppose, observation of renewables and energy and where we are now and the threats to your business, for example.
Absolutely, and I think, as Donal touched on, I think if we have an indigenous industry, you are immune to those shocks. I suppose, I'd look at Project Clover maybe through the lens of sustainability, and if you look at the three classic kind of spheres that make up sustainability, you've got your environmental, right? And Clover certainly delivers there in terms of that decarbonisation agenda, both at plant level that Donal has touched on, but also at farm level, because there's through the soil organic improver, the farmers actually have the ability to actually reduce their footprint on their own farms. You look at the social component again, and again, there's loads of examples all over Europe. But I think countries like Germany, Denmark, France, they've done a phenomenal job at AD. There's over 10,000 plants, for example, in Germany, and the impact that has socially in those rural communities, can't be understated. So there's phenomenal opportunity, I would say, actually, to get employment in rural communities through an AD infrastructure. And I suppose the final piece then is that economic one. And again, you can imagine the injection that would give, the financial injection that an AD infrastructure in Ireland would give to local rural communities. So that's the lens I would look through with Damien, and I think there's phenomenal opportunity there. And yeah, for wearing the Carbery hat, we can't get our hands quick enough on biomethane. We're absolutely crying out for it. Because, again, we've very ambitious plans in terms of decarbonising our main plant in Ballineen. And being brutally honest, we can't get there until we get biomethane into the system. So it's critical, and obviously we're not alone. I think I can speak for the dairy industry when I say that.
All right, just before I move on kind of towards the end to our final section, talking about, the win-win, as you say, Donal, if we can reach all these targets and farmers and environmentalists and everybody can work together to achieve the targets and by 2030. I just want to come back, Tara, to one, I suppose, outstanding topic that's talked about quite a lot in relation to consumer demand, and that is organic production. And we see the EU Green Deal Farm to Fork ambition. Part of that is to increase and ramp up organic production. We're so far behind in this country. What has happened, and why are we not producing more organic food in Ireland?
I guess there's a number of challenges within that. We've been looking at it with market responsibility. We would say that the demand is there. Obviously, there's a big investment for a farmer to make that decision. It takes time and it takes a lot of effort. And I guess there's been different occasions where they've been burnt by the journeys, where organic has gone up or down in recessions, etc. But the data would tell you that the organic market is here to stay. There are, without a doubt, increasing demands from Ireland to go down this route. But if we don't meet the production, then that market will be taken away from us. We would believe that there's more coordination required in the supply chain, in that production meeting the processor demand, meeting the market demand, and that coordination is perhaps less developed than it should be. So we're obviously working very, very closely with the department, with Tagisk, to explore where to next on it, because you can articulate the demand as eloquently as you like, but if the product isn't there, then you're wasting your time.
So are we missing a golden opportunity here?
Are we missing a golden opportunity, or has the time come for us to act? And I would say the time has come for us to, I guess, go big and decide we're going to invest in this category. Burbia is standing there ready to work with the industry to ensure that. We've got the reports, we've got the market prioritisation done. We're presently doing a market investigation again, looking at all of the other countries around the world that we would look to for inspiration, to see who has done it well, what were the levers that they used to get action, what were the communications that they enabled themselves to I guess, convinced that they had the product ranges there. We've been very, very successful. If you look at our salmon production, 95% of Ireland's salmon production is organic, and a premium is returned into the market for that. But at the moment, what we're finding is that for a number of those sectors where we do have production, it's getting lost in the system because of that lack of coordination. But we think it is definitely an opportunity for us.
Okay, all right. I want to move on to, obviously the big prize for decarbonisation and the implementation of the Paris Climate Accord and so on and so forth is obviously a healthier, safer, more sustainable planet for us all to enjoy and thrive in. But there are obviously, I'm sure as well, as Donal says, win-wins and big prizes for food producers and farmers at the end of that rainbow as well. It's probably a little difficult for some producers at the moment to actually see what that actually will be if I suppose their outputs are going to be challenged. But just in relation to the future of farming, Tara, and by 2030, what do Irish food producers have to look forward to? What do Irish farmers have to look forward to at the end of this journey as we continue this journey? And can, for example, the Foodwise 2030 deliver for both farmers and the environment in sync, do you think?
Now, I'm not going to pretend I've got a crystal ball that's anyway more efficient than anybody else's, Damien, but when I look at Food Vision 2030 and the evolution towards a food systems approach and the evolution to actually putting at the centre of that the viability of our farmers, the viability of the supply chain, that's a fundamental step change in approach right the way through. And you're also seeing a huge focus on ensuring that the communities that serve the provision of food as well are protected, are invested in, and are heard. So I think that's a huge sign of progress, confidence, etc. So that's one side of it. If I look at the market then, whereas I mentioned earlier with the research that we've looking at, that today 1 in 2 food buyers insist on having sustainability as their credentials and use it actually as a differentiator, you would say to yourselves that given that we have leadership in this space today, given that the ambitions and the infrastructure that our industry is looking to put in, that our policymakers are looking to put in, and given the ambitions of our farmers, because if I look at the decade that has just gone by, if I even look at the 3 years that have just gone by, the last year, our food industry has consistently shown its resilience, has consistently shown its entrepreneurship, its innovation. So I would be very, very confident of our industry. However, when I look at how we position that overseas, and that's the real challenge, because you're talking about, I hope, a 13 billion plus euro industry, as we look at the value of that industry going forward, then it's about capturing the value of those credentials. And I would say as long as we can keep ourselves at the thought leadership side of this debate and never at the laggards side of this debate, then we can look at this as an opportunity ahead of us rather than the stick that's going to drag us through. So it's about being ahead and actually creating our own destiny and embracing that future destiny, because that's the future, I think, has been laid out in all of those policy documents for us. Now it's a case of how do we navigate to be there and make the best position.
Donal, I suppose farming has always been a volatile business, and not knowing what is around the corner from day to day, regardless of what sector of the enterprise of agriculture you're involved in this country. So I suppose it is a little unfair maybe if you say, well, what's going to happen in the future? Anything could happen in the meantime. But in terms of looking to 2030 and the targets that are being set out now in the Climate Action Programme, in EU Green Deal, and all the various different initiatives at home and abroad that are going to affect how farmers actually produce food into the future. I suppose farmers, and particularly dairy farmers and beef farmers, have never been as unsure about where this journey over the next decade or two is going to actually take them. But do you see light at the end of the tunnel, to use that silly phrase in a way, for them? What opportunities are there along this journey in terms of, big prizes and win-win scenarios for Irish farmers as you know them?
Yes, if I go back to your conversation earlier on with Enda, where you said, farmers are getting a bad press. Our farming community are highly intelligent, they're highly educated, and they're highly motivated. And what they need, and as you said earlier on, they need direction. They need direction that's not going to lead them into a bottleneck here if they do this and that and that. So above all, they need direction and how they're going to do it. But I would see farming practices will change, that's for sure. I think sustainability will be part of, as in protein and milk, it'll be part of what you buy. Carbon farming will be part of what we do. And I think it will be profitable for everybody. It's like the technological age, everything changes, and the people change with it and adapt. And I think our farming community are well able to do that. They just need direction. And Project Clover, with an indigenous industry that's rural based, will give them lots of opportunities, because these are quite large plants, lots of employment. They can supply the guaranteed incomes. So it adds another dimension to the farming community in that way. So 2030, it's all not doom and gloom. I think, science will come behind farming, and I believe it's not as bad as we are led to believe. The good stories need to get out there, and we have to feed the world in a sustainable way. And that's the bottom line. If we don't produce food, it will create other problems.
Yeah. And in future-proofing, Irish food production, do the benefits outweigh the negatives, do you think?
Oh yeah, I think so. If I could just maybe go back to the question you posed to Donal and Tara as well, Damien, I think it's very important as well when we look out to 2030, because I suppose right now we know that the Climate Action Committee, their recommendations are made and they're going to Cabinet shortly. And I think it's critical as well that whatever target is agreed, that it doesn't cripple the industry, because there's lots of figures being floated around. I think the last thing we want here is a crazy figure that's just going to, cripple the industry. So, to Donal and Tara's point, I think it's got to be realistic. And, farmers are up for this, but let's be smart about it, I suppose I would say as well. But, the benefits definitely, I think, outweigh, I suppose, the cons, Damien. And, if you look at what we produce across the spectrum from beef to dairy, you look at the carbon intensity of it, it's the best in the world. We know the quality is supreme. So we produce a really good product. I think we just need to be kind of smart, as I said, how we plan the next, 15, I suppose up to 2050 even, and that we give farmers a realistic roadmap that we can all work to. And definitely, I think the benefits outweigh the negatives, I would say, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stay with you just before we finish up, because we have had questions from some RDS members, and thank you for that. But I've time just for a question each for you from Karen Brosnan, who's the chair of Nuffield Ireland, and thanks to Karen for sending in a question. Enda, she wants to know, what positive role can co-ops continue to play in delivering long-term economic, social and environmental development?
Okay, so I could think of a number, I suppose. If I just think of the advisors that co-ops have on the ground, Damien, they're dealing with farmers every day, and they actually have a critical role in terms of the advice that's given to farmers. So, for example, the farmer has a choice of using standard urea versus protected urea. So the co-op official can be saying, look, actually, it's better for the environment to go with the protected urea. So that's just an advice one. Comes to Project Clover, I think, again, just you'd like to think, again, through the co-op ethos and the co-op kind of membership, that farmers actually can have a big role in the ADs that will be developed and will have skin in the game. So I think the cooperative movement can have a key role there. And again, socially, I suppose, look, the cooperative model it's well proven. It's been there for centuries at this stage, and it's served farmers very, very well. I think you look at the co-ops that we have. I think certainly from a social perspective, Damien, it's certainly served those farmers very well.
Okay, and Karen's question for you, Donal, is what role can this goes back to what you're saying about the farmer's story, what role can the RDS or other organisations play in providing a space for a more balanced debate around climate change?
Yes, I mean, basically you have to understand the issues deeper, and it's very easy paint a brush and saying, we're bad, industry is bad, farmers are bad, data centres are bad. You have to really go under the bonnet and you have to educate the people what is bad about it and is it really bad, because it's politics and it's giving the wrong messages there because people don't understand it, and the role of RDS and others is to understand the issues and how the industry and the rural communities are dealing with the issues and bring them to the surface in a good way and in a positive way, so we have a balanced debate.
Okay, and Tara, we touched on this a little bit earlier on. The question from Karen to you is, what's the impact of ongoing farm expansion having on the environment, for example, in light of the various EPA reports on water quality and other environmental concerns?
Yeah. Before I go to that one, I might just build on the first two answers as well, because I would say co-ops do have a huge responsibility, but industry cooperating with farmers has a huge responsibility right across the board. And when we look at initiatives like Origin Green, Damien, you'd have remembered a couple of years ago, we brought this new vocab into the Irish lexicon of co-opetition. And that whole idea of we need to cooperate like we have never done before, and whether that's co-ops or whether that's PLCs or whether that's family businesses.
We see it with Project Clover.
Exactly, and that has to be our way of working. And when I go to the US or when we go to different parts of the world, one of the USPs we have is our ability to cooperate. The fact that we network so well, the fact that everyone knows everybody anyway, is viewed as a fantastic asset of Ireland. So I would say whether you're a co-op or you're anybody in Ireland, cooperation is actually something that we should really play on. And for the RDS question, the RDS has a fantastic responsibility, I think, and has taken on a remit with regard to education. And so much of the debate that's had very often is ill-informed or short-cutted, that everyone reads a tweet or they'll read a soundbite rather than really understanding the issues. And I think that's the fantastic thing of being here today, to actually have a conversation with different elements of the supply chain that we'll all take maybe a very similar issue but come at it from a slightly different angle. And that, I think, I've learned a lot today, and it's about how do we enrich the debates and create more opportunities, not to create debates that we're falling out on, but debates that we learn. So it's the tone of the debates. I think the RDS should have a fantastic role going forward to ensure that tone remains respectful, but it's the one that we're educated from. And then finally, answering the question you did ask me, having answered everybody else's, clearly there are challenges with expansion. And I guess all the more reason to go back to those points of education and cooperation. If I look at the ASIP programme, where industry again is cooperating with the policymakers and regulators to really target where we're vulnerable, to learn from where we can be better, to actually be transparent on what the results are, because that's the only way we're going to navigate a growth agenda. Because you would hate in Ireland if growth was viewed as a dirty word. And I think that if we don't really work together transparently and in a real, with a growth mindset, we're in danger of actually talking down our own opportunities. So it's a case of not growth for growth's sake. It's absolutely looking at sustainable growth that is economically sustainable for our farmers, etc. But we do need to be transparent in what the price of that growth will be and the mitigations we're prepared to invest in to ensure that it's sustainable growth.
Sustainable growth. Well, on that positive words, we leave it there. I want to thank you all very much for your time and your insight, to Enda, to Donal and to Tara. And indeed, just like Tara, I hope you at home have learned a lot from this past hour's discussion on the future of food production in a sustainable manner in Ireland. And before we finish, I'm going to hand you back over to Geraldine Carney.
Thank you to our panel for a fascinating conversation, and to Damien for your excellent work in hosting this discussion. There are many other aspects to the decarbonisation of the food industry which I hope we can consider further during this series. As we look to adapt to these challenging times and build for a more sustainable future, I hope this was a valuable discussion for everyone involved in business. The best way to keep informed about upcoming events in the RDS Vision 2030 series is by becoming a member of the RDS. But in the meanwhile, please subscribe to our YouTube and social media channels to keep you up to date. A final thank you to our panel and to you for joining us today. Thank you all.